should follow that both the Arctic and Antarctic regions would share similar conditions and characteristics, such as comparative temperatures, seasons, length of daylight, etc. But in reality, the two regions are almost as different as night and day. To begin, let's address the prime influence on climate, the sun. While on a ball Earth, you'd expect the sun to behave very similar at both poles. In our investigation, we find this is clearly not the case. For instance, the longest days in the north are much longer than those in the south. Dawn and dusk also occur differently in these two regions, with twilight coming and lasting much longer in the north, sometimes for over an hour, compared to similar southern latitudes where twilight always comes and goes quickly, sometimes in a matter of minutes. This is exactly what is to be expected from a flat plane, with the sun circling above and around the central pole in 24-hour cycles, traveling steadily between the tropics every 6 months. Sticking to the sun, Another contrasting point between the northern and southern regions is the midnight sun, a distinctly Arctic phenomenon occurring every year during the summer solstice, where, for several days, any observer significantly far north can watch the sun travel in circles overhead, not setting for upwards of 72 hours. Meanwhile, in Antarctica, corresponding with the Arctic midnight sun, the Royal Belgian Geographical Society notes that from May 17th to July 21st, the sun doesn't even rise above the Antarctic horizon. This is, of course, because during those days, the sun is at his innermost cycle, revolving tightly above and around the northern center. Though scientists will claim that the midnight sun is also an Antarctic experience, there are no uncut videos demonstrating this, nor are any independent explorers allowed into Antarctica to either verify or refute this claim. But that issue's a whole other can of worms. Further demonstrating that the central northern regions receive a more benevolent climate than their southern counterparts would be the example of Iceland. At 65 degrees north latitude, Iceland thrives with 870 native plant species and abundant animal life. Compare this to Georgia Island, which, despite being a whole 11 degrees closer to the equator than Iceland, at 54 degrees south latitude, is nearly devoid of any ecoculture, having only a measly 18 native plant species and virtually no animal life. In fact, Captain James Cook lamented that he was unable to find there a single shrub large enough to make a toothpick. But to crown it all off, despite the Arctic regions enjoying moderately warm summers and manageable winters, where the average annual temperature is minus 15 degrees Celsius, Antarctica is by far the coldest place on Earth, with an average annual temperature of minus 50 degrees Celsius, where it never even warms enough to melt the perpetual ice and snow, and it also holds the all-time lowest temperature ever to be recorded on Earth of minus 93.2 degrees Celsius. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions. The year is 1954, and Admiral Richard Byrd has just returned from his latest Antarctic expedition. Enthusiastically, he speaks of an unexplored land, quote, beyond the South Pole, as big as the United States. Calling it the future of the nation, he further touts it as being the most valuable and important place in the world for science, an untouched reservoir of untapped resources, including coal, oil, minerals, and uranium. Now, remember that these are the 1950s, and there are no environmental groups to argue sustainability. The world is the businessman's oyster, and the future is looking very promising. But here's where the twist comes in, because following Admiral Byrd's next mission to Antarctica, after supposedly returning to the United States, nothing happens. No further missions, no talk of any further exploration, nothing. And then a meeting was held between the nations eagerly awaiting to slice Antarctica up like apple pie, with all signatories agreeing to no colonization of Antarctica. In 1959, the Antarctic Treaty was enacted, barring any independent exploration of Antarctica by the public, with no revisions until the year 2041. Although independent explorers such as Jarl Andahoy have attempted independent access to Antarctica, as they've approached the southern latitudes, they've been met by armed ships threatening to open fire on them if they didn't turn around and go back. There are only 3 entry points to Antarctica sanctioned by the Antarctic Treaty, through which civilians may enter and tour Antarctica, but only under the supervision of pre-planned tours. To date, over 50 nations have signed on to the Antarctic Treaty, which, to this day, remains unbreached. Now, has any other treaty between industrialized nations lasted so long? Furthermore, as rocket science was also a quickly expanding field at the time, it only followed that the authorities seized control over the aeronautic industry before private enterprises were able to venture high enough and disclose the globe deception. With the establishment of NASA, the space program was militarized, and all the best and brightest scientists and engineers were then recruited and compartmentalized by this government agency. The lunar missions were aptly named after Apollo, as their prime purpose was to reinforce the heliocentric paradigm in that both the Earth and the Moon are orbs orbiting the Sun. In reality, the rocket launches are merely a spectacle, with all launches curving off and falling back to Earth, out of view, and the images they've fed us faked, composited, or downright computer-generated. But the authorities have in fact known what the real map looks like, and they've managed to keep most navigators, astronomers, and the populace unaware behind the globe and celestial sphere, not to mention Mercator's projection. But the United States Geological Survey, or USGS for short, the prime atlas and map makers of the world, have been using a completely different map, the azimuthal equidistant projection, which was developed and proposed 1,000 years ago by Abu Rayhan Biruni, a Persian scholar who believed the Earth was flat. But hey, the authorities that shouldn't be love hiding their secrets in plain sight. All other proofs aside, the differences between the globe and the flat Earth become apparent when considering distances south of the equator. After all, haven't navigators, geographers, and map makers mapped these areas? And shouldn't they have noticed this quirk by now, if the Earth is indeed flat? Well, the reality is, the rabbit hole just gets deeper from here. So, to begin, the distance between Sydney, Australia and Nelson, New Zealand, on the ball Earth, given their coordinates and sparing you the spherical trigonometry, should be 1,310 miles. But the Australian Handbook, Almanac, Shippers and Importers Directory states the measured distance as being 1,550 miles, which is a full 18% longer. And while on the ball Earth model, Antarctica is said to be a continent of ice situated at the bottom of the ball from 78 degrees south latitude, it should therefore not have a perimeter greater than 12,000 miles. However, early explorers like Captain Cook and James Clark Ross, in attempting to circumnavigate Antarctica, took 3 to 4 years to do so, and clocked in the distance traveled at 50 to 60,000 miles. That's twice the circumference of the equator. But the real proof for the flat Earth map is in the flight paths. On the ball Earth, several flights would have their shortest, quickest, and straightest path over or around the Antarctic continent. But instead, these flights take all manner of tangential detours, crossing into the northern hemisphere to refuel. Their reason? Antarctica's too cold, they claim. Well, I'm not buying it. When they claim there are bases with working machinery set up all over Antarctica. So let's just take a look at the actual flight paths and see what they have to disclose. One flight that should be a simple 11-hour shot across the Indian Ocean is from Johannesburg, South Africa to Perth, Australia. However, This flight takes a detour north, stopping in either Dubai, Hong Kong, or Malaysia to refuel, for a total flight time averaging over 18 hours. This ridiculously wayward detour is frustrating to say the least, but on the flat Earth map starts to make sense. Another quick and easy flight, you would think, is from Johannesburg to Santiago, Chile. While an easy 12-hour flight below the Tropic of Capricorn is to be expected, instead every flight crosses the equator to refuel in Senegal, all the way near the Tropic of Cancer, for a total flight time of 19 hours. Though it doesn't make sense on the globe, as you can see it fits perfectly on the flat Earth map. A third flight from Johannesburg is to Sao Paulo, Brazil, which should be a direct 10-hour flight across the 25th degree south latitude. But instead, every flight crosses into the north to stop in London to refuel, making the total flight time 24 hours. From Santiago, Chile to Sydney, Australia, a straight 15-hour flight across the South Pacific is expected. Despite refueling options in either New Zealand or any island in the South Pacific, the flight stops all the way at Los Angeles to refuel before continuing south to its destination. As already stated, these detours make no sense on the globe, but are explained and work perfectly well on the flat Earth map, having the North Pole at the center. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
As a born-again globe earther, I realize NASA, we'd never lied to you. Where the continents are at in relationship to the oceans, it's always been the same. We've always have shown you what the Earth looks like, and it's not flat. We would never change the size of anything. We only do real science. Everything we've shown you has been consistent through the years, the math, everything. There's your Earth, ocean and continents never changing. We went to the moon and we showed you the Earth. There it is, over the American flag, the ever-expanding America. We gave you a picture of the Earth in 2015 from the moon. It's a lot bigger now. It's getting a little closer, a lot closer to the Earth, which is a little concerning, but it hasn't changed. Us globeheads, we would never lie to you and try to trick you. Never. The Earth's the ball. Wake up. Flat Earthers, pay very close attention to what I'm going to say to you. This is the UN logo, an azimuthal equidistance projection map with the laurel wreaths of Apollyon around it to hide the edges. This belongs to the Freemasonry Society, broken up into 33 degrees of the highest ranking Freemasons. This here is not our flat Earth map. Once again, it's not our map. The tactic of a globehead is to take something that belongs to them, belongs to their Freemasonry Society, who worship angels, devils, and pretend that this is our map and attack us with it. It's a government projection map. And it is very accurate from center point projection. It destroys the globe concerning flight routes, but they know it's not an accurate Earth map. They are using this map and they're making you believe as a flat earther that this is your map, and they're taking it to disprove you concerning flight routes from Australia to South America. This is their tactic. By taking what belongs to them and flipping it over and saying it belongs to you, and this proves that your Earth is a globe. So while they're doing that, they want you to forget about all the flight routes north of the equator from projection on a azimuthal equidistance. They want you to forget about that. They won't even talk about them. Okay, so here's an example of globeheads from metabunk.org. Flat Earth theory debunked by short flights, the famous QF27 route. That's from Sydney to Santiago, Chile. This is their argument to debunk young flat earthers researching out these things, because they use this flight route all the time. But flat earthers, you know how to, I'm going to show you how to deal with them. And what they'll tell you is that your map, which is not your map, it's a Masonic order map, has too many miles going from Sydney to Santiago, Chile. So this map must prove that the Earth is a sphere. Mick West here, great researcher. Mick West bases his finding on the Earth being a sphere because of an airplane. And he does the same thing. He takes the azimuthal projection map and draws a ridiculous line on it to Santiago in Sydney to prove that we in fact live on a globe and not a flat plane that does not spin. But here's something they won't tell you. Here's a flight tracker tracking the flight from Sydney to Santiago, Chile, and it's picked up by the Australian ATC radar. Okay, this is the Australian Arctic radar system that tracks the flights across the Pacific here. Okay? Australian ATC radar is controlled by these guys, NASA. Yeah, the same guys that brought us the fake moon landings, the fake going to Mars, and the fake ISS space station. In fact, they control all the airline routes that we see on the trackers. The times, the positions, everything. Houston Airline Fleet Management, Vortex and Wake Turbulence Studies, Denver Airport Coherent Technologies, in partnership with the FAA and who? NASA. So, who's the FAA in partnership with? NASA. In August 2005, Air Service, Australian Air Services, and United National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, signed a letter of agreement to undertake collaborative research on air traffic management, decision support, automation, communication, navigation, and surveillance. So who is Australia and the FAA in partnership with? NASA. The ones that bring us all the different globe sizes, continent placements, ocean placements. That NASA. The ones that fake going to the moon, fake going to Mars, and fake live feeds on the ISS fake station. All comes from these guys here.